Good morning, everyone. I wanted to give an update on some policies that are coming down and talk a little bit about funding and where we are. This is Lisa Ellis with SC for Ed. Sorry, I should have introduced myself at the very beginning. I actually gave this presentation to the faculty and staff at my school earlier this week, and I wanted to go ahead and share some information with y'all. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we've got some legislative updates. S419, they sort of finished up the around the state subcommittee hearings as well as the ones in Columbia. We're keeping an eye on this one. I know that the Senate has made a lot of changes compared to the House bill. The crossover date is April 10th, which is this week. So what will happen is if that bill is going to go anywhere, it will have to come to the full floor and then cross over to the House before April 10th. So we're not real sure what's going to happen with that. However, I want to talk about S556, education savings accounts bills, because that we're a little bit more concerned about right now. That did receive a subcommittee hearing this past Thursday, and it was really an interesting time. So S556, and it has a companion bill, H3681, which I don't know that has gotten much traction in the House. But this one is the one that continues with privatization, which the 419 bill sort of opens the door for. Education savings accounts, what it does is it takes state money for each child. So if I have a child and I don't want them to attend the public school, the amount of money that the state pays to educate my child is going to go into a savings account that I have control over and can spend in terms of education, anywhere from private school to charter school to tutoring. But it also includes, language in there about I can pay an education consultant with that money, which to us is very nebulous. It also allows that K through 12 money to be spent on college, and we're not even sure how that is even legal. But again, that ability is in there as well. Worse with this bill is that 4% of that state money will go to manage the accounts, to oversee the accounts. And again, we don't know exactly where that 4% or who would get that 4%, but I can assure you it's not public schools. And then on top of that, a reasonable fee to pay private financial firms to hold the money into those accounts. We believe that anytime you're taking public school money away from public schools, you're not creating a fair and equitable situation, but to then allow this money to go to pay for private for-profit banking firms is just a really, really terrible, terrible, immoral idea. The subcommittee hearing that occurred this past Thursday, there were about 3 or 4 speakers who came from out of state to speak on the benefits of education savings accounts. We think that is very interesting, that people that are being paid to come from out of state to testify, that's something that we want to make sure that we keep our eye on. Again, the only reason for them to do that is because somebody is paying for them to come, and somebody ultimately is going to profit off of this tax money. We had a couple people that spoke against education savings accounts and did a really good job. So we're really keeping our eye on that one to see where it goes. And then you see the other 2 that I just put down there for interest. We think that the Senate proviso to allow school districts to use digital instruction is a great idea, particularly as we still lose days to catastrophic weather events, and testing windows do not necessarily change because of that. So now I want to talk about the funding a little bit and just try to explain how the funding works and how the House Ways and Means budget is trying to change it. So ever since 1977 and the Education Finance Act was ratified, there has been a formula that the state uses to fund schools, and it's based on the per pupil or the weighted PU. I'm sorry, it's a terrible name. Weighted pupil unit that this Education Finance Act created. So what the EFA does is its money funds teacher salaries and operations. Doesn't include school administration, doesn't include district office administration. It strictly is teacher salaries. And the other thing with it is that it's a 70-30 split. So 70% is paid for by the state, but the local school districts have to come up with the other 30% of funding. The EFA was put into law for two reasons. One was that the legislators and the education specialists at the time recognized that it did not cost the same to educate every child. And that's where the WPU came in. For example, if you have a little Lisa Ellis, who is just your average run-of-the-mill student, she's going to cost the state 1.0 in a WPU. But if you have another student who is classified as talented and gifted, or special needs, or an English language learner, or it lives in poverty, or any sort of one of those factors that may add a little bit more to the education of that student, they may become a 1.2 or 1.3 of WPU, and so they get funded a little bit more. And the second thing that the Education Finance Act did was it took into account inflation. And as we know, inflation occurs every year, and so each year the state was supposed to increase the funding to cover that inflation increase. Now, the reality is that the state has not kept up with its own law. We've heard that it has only fully funded the EFA 8 times in its 40-something years of being on record or on law. And in the last 11 years, it's only been fully funded once. So when we talk about this, the state not funding the districts and the schools appropriately, we're talking about this Education Finance Act and base student costs. Just to give you a little bit of idea how different the funding is, the state law for the 2018-2019 school year had the state was supposed to fund at $3,018 per student. The actual funding was $2,485 per student. So you can see it's a little bit almost like a 500 some odd dollars decrease in what we're supposed to be getting. So the House Ways and Means is evidently tired of hearing that they are not fully funding education and that they are taking the blame for that. So I'm just going to let that sit there for a minute. And so what they decided to do was they decided to create a state aid to classrooms. And basically what they did was they rolled the EFA line and the EFA fringe. Now the fringe sort of covers your teacher benefits, healthcare, retirement, those sort of things. They rolled that line and then they added in the teacher salary increase, which is part of the budget this year, the $159 million. They rolled those 3 line items into one. And we're excited that they kept the teacher salary increase out of the EFA line item because remember I talked about the 70-30 split. So that prevents the districts from having to come up with 30% of that. The state is going to cover that entire teacher salary increase if this passes. But what it does is it technically shows that they are going to be paying $3,846 per student, which is more than they're saying. But if you look at it, it's not exactly accurate because what they didn't do was they didn't increase the EFA line and the EFA fringe like they were supposed to. They kept the same numbers from the last school year and rolled it into one. So what that means is they didn't increase base student cost, which means that it's going to be difficult for districts to come up with that money because they didn't increase that base student cost. Now, if you notice, they cannot call it the base student cost because they're not following their own law. So that's why they've changed it to state aid to classrooms. So while technically it's more money in terms of that $159 million in new reoccurring money, it does not actually help school districts because they have not increased that base student cost. So here's the sort of a breakdown of the salary increase funding update. the state of South Carolina received $1 billion in surplus this year. So that means that what was projected, they received $1 billion more than that. And roughly half of that was new reoccurring money, which means that it's going to show up in the budget each year unless there's some sort of recession. So if you look at this breakdown, there's a couple things that I want to point out. There's a 2% state employee salary increase. And if you have paid any attention to the plight of state employees, they actually get paid worse than teachers do and deserve much more than 2%, but at least they put 2% in there. The other thing that I want to point out is that I've heard from several different people who are, pay attention to what state government is that South Carolina governs by crisis. And so if you'll notice, there's 2 lawsuits that the state lost, and so they're going to have to pay out that money. One is because they were not funding local governments appropriately, and the other was because whatever they were doing in the prisons was not enough to prevent the hepatitis C from an increase in hepatitis C in prison inmates. So those are 2 lawsuits that they've got to take care of. They're also giving higher education $44 million, and that is to freeze college tuition costs. College tuition in South Carolina is one of the highest in the country, and that's because the state has really not funded higher education since the 2008 recession. And then you see teacher salary increases, and teacher salary increases there are by far the biggest chunk of that new reoccurring money. And that teacher salary increases goes to the current Ways and Means budget salary schedule, where they are increasing the first year salary to $35,000 and then having to bump up the rest of it, which is on average years 4 to 23 on the salary schedule, a 4% salary increase. And then that last line that means that you've got a little bit over $49 million left for all of the other state agencies to fight over that new reoccurring money. So that just gives you an idea of the funding. And again, that's just the new reoccurring money, that $500 million that the state will continue to have every year. Okay, so what does this look like for the districts? You may have heard your districts talking about, even though the state is fully funding the salary increase, the district is still going to have to make up for it. And so what I did is, because I'm in Richland 2, I'm using Richland 2 salary schedule as the example. So you can go and pull your own salary schedule and adjust it accordingly. I think SC4Ed thinks that Dillon County is the only county that pays on the state minimum salary schedule. And so everybody else, you're making over the state minimum salary schedule. So what this means is the state is going to pay 100% of the salary increase that's on that state salary schedule. Okay. So remember, the state salary schedule only goes up to year 23. So if you are above year 23, that means that your district, if they're going to give you the 4%, they're going to have to come up with that entire increase. And that's where the districts are saying, we're going to have to find the money, and we don't have the money. So there's the example there. So I used a teacher with a master's degree and 10 years experience. So the state salary schedule says that teacher earns $43,949 for the 2018-2019 school year. So with the 4% salary increase would move that teacher's salary schedule up to $45,706.96. I don't know if they round up or down. So I just left it as that for the next school year. So they're paying that full salary increase. But a district like Richland 2 pays over that. And so the Richland 2 salary schedule for a teacher with a master's degree and 10 years experience is $49,269 for the 2018-19 school year. So the state is going to pay that 4% on their state salary schedule, but then Richland 2 is going to have to pay the 4% on the difference. So that $5,320 difference between their salary schedule and the state, which is going to equal about $212.80. Okay. So when the districts are saying we're going to have trouble making up that difference, they're talking about whatever surplus or whatever extra they pay over the state salary schedule. Can the districts technically only pay what the state is? Yes. Do we think that that is a good idea in recruiting or retaining teachers? No. So what's going to happen is the districts, if they're smart, they're going to have to find a way to get that money. Now, do we think that districts use all their money efficiently? No. And so the hope is that these districts will choose to cut corners without cutting school-based staff. That would be the smart thing that they would do. So that just gives you an understanding of why, even though the state is paying 100%, technically, the districts will still have to come up with some of the money. So here's sort of your call to action. Of course, the wearing red on Wednesdays, and the importance of that is not the fact that you're just wearing red, but that you're publicizing it. So our power as teachers is in our voice and is in our numbers. So we want to see the publicizing of you in your red and supporting education and telling why all over social media. We want you to attend educational meetings and events. Your local areas are doing small events to help you sort of learn about what's going on in your regions. Also, attend board meetings. There's a lot of stuff that happens that directly affects you in the classroom at board meetings. So even if you don't feel comfortable speaking, showing up and wearing your red is vital to make sure that elected officials know that we are watching. Call and write your senator about funding salary increases. Make sure they know that it's important to fully fund any salary increase, but also to fully fund the student-based cost. I know that the Senate is trying to find the 5% instead of the 4%, and not really sure how they're doing that, but there is some discrepancy about how that is funded. And we really need to make sure that senators understand the importance of them fully funding any salary increase, but also funding that student-based cost, because that's where the districts have the money to make up those other salary increases. Of course, keep current with legislation that affects public education and make sure you're communicating your wishes. It's really important that our senators and our House members get tired of hearing from us. You've heard the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We need to be that squeaky wheel that is so respectfully obnoxious that we get what we want and what is best for students, okay? And also, we've got to get parents and community on board. So make sure you're telling your story to anyone and everyone who will listen. What does the public education setting look like today? I can assure you it is very different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but 30 and 40 years ago. Most people's perception of public education is when they were a student. And we've got to start changing that narrative to show them what it looks like. The last slide that I'm going to give you is the Senate Finance Committee. If your senator is on that Finance Committee, you need to be calling and emailing them and writing them immediately. But even if your senator is not, the budget will go to the full floor. And so you need to make sure that your senator knows what to do about the budget in terms of South Carolina public education. So that's about all with the updates. We're trying to really stay on top of this and keep you informed. But the best thing that you can do is really keep doing what is best for your students and talking about that to anyone and everyone who will listen. Y'all, your voice is so powerful, and it's about time that it was heard and listened to. So y'all have a great evening. I'm sorry, it's 9:05 in the morning. Have a great morning and the rest of your Sunday, and have a great week.